My beloved friends, before we speak of Jesus, before we speak of affirmations, before we speak of any teaching at all, let us begin where all truth must begin, not in words, not in thought, but in the stillness of consciousness itself. Let us pause here, not as an exercise, not as a method, but as a simple recognition that awareness is already present. You are conscious now. You are aware now. And this awareness did not come because you summoned it, nor because you practiced for it, nor because you repeated anything. It is simply here. This is the holy ground upon which all true understanding stands. For many years now, the world of spirituality has become very busy. There is much speaking, much declaring, much repeating, much effort expended in the hope of bringing God closer, health nearer, peace more secure, supply more abundant. And yet, beneath all of this activity, there is a quiet confusion that few dare to look at honestly. The confusion is not in the desire for good, for God has placed that desire in every heart. The confusion lies in the assumption that truth must be spoken in order to become real, that God must be declared in order to be present, that life must be affirmed in order to function. We are told today that if we repeat certain words often enough, believe them strongly enough, feel them intensely enough, they will become true. And so many earnest seekers rise each morning declaring, I am this, I am that, hoping that by repetition they may persuade life to change its course. Yet, my friends, let us look gently and honestly. Did Jesus ever do this? Did he rise each day to affirm his power? Did he repeat statements to convince the universe to cooperate with him? Did he declare truth in order to make it so? The record shows us something very different. Jesus said, I of mine own self do nothing. And again he said, the Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works. These are not the words of a man attempting to use truth. These are the words of one who has ceased using altogether. They are the words of consciousness resting in its source. Jesus was not speaking toward God, he was living from God. He was not declaring truth to create reality. He was abiding in reality and allowing it to reveal itself. Let us be very clear at the outset. This is not a condemnation of affirmations, nor a criticism of those who use them. The spiritual path is always gentle. It never accuses, it only uncovers. And what we are uncovering here is a subtle but profound distinction, one that, if seen, can release the seeker from endless effort and return him to peace. The distinction is this: there is a vast difference between speaking truth and recognizing truth. One comes from the human mind reaching outward. The other arises from consciousness resting inward. Jesus never taught his disciples to repeat phrases in order to change conditions. Instead, he said, be still and know that I am God. He did not say declare that God is or affirm that God will act. He said know. And knowing is not an activity of the lips, nor even of the thinking mind. Knowing is the quiet certainty that dawns when striving ceases. It is the awareness that does not need to announce itself because it is self-evident. When Moses stood before the burning bush and asked, "Who shall I say sent me?" the answer came not as a description, not as a title, not as a formula, but as a revelation. I am that I am. Not I will be, not I shall become, not I must be affirmed, simply I am. And this I am was not offered as a phrase to be repeated, but as the very name of being, itself, self-existent, self-sustaining, needing nothing to support it. Here, at the very beginning of our consideration, We must allow something to settle quietly within us. If truth must be repeated in order to function, then it is not truth. If God must be reminded to act, then he is not God. If life depends upon our declarations, then life is fragile indeed. But the Christ revealed something else entirely. He revealed that life is already complete, already whole, already functioning as divine law, and that the human struggle arises only from not recognizing this. Joel Goldsmith spent his life pointing away from effort and back toward awareness. Again and again he reminded us that we are not here to improve humanhood, but to awaken from it. Not to fix life, but to see through the belief that life is broken. And so, as we move forward in this contemplation, let us do so without the desire to gain something, achieve something, or add something to ourselves. Let us simply remain open. Let us listen, not with the mind that wants answers, but with the heart that is willing to be still. For what we are about to explore is not a new technique, nor a better affirmation, nor a more powerful method. It is a return to the simplicity that Jesus lived, from a simplicity so quiet that the busy mind often overlooks it. And yet, in that simplicity lies the secret of his power, his peace, and his freedom. Except ye become as little children, he said, ye shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. And the child does not affirm life into existence. The child simply lives. So too must we learn again to live from the source rather than speak toward it. And this begins here, now, in the stillness of recognition. My friends, having entered this stillness together, let us now look gently at what has quietly come to dominate much of modern spiritual practice. Not with judgment, not with resistance, but with the clear, compassionate seeing that dissolves illusion. For wherever truth is seen clearly, error loses its power without struggle. Today, the spiritual seeker is often taught that the path to God is paved with effort. We are told to repeat, to declare, to insist, to affirm again and again until something changes. And so the mind becomes busy, occupied with words, occupied with results, occupied with the future. There's a constant activity of doing, of trying, of managing spiritual life as though it were a fragile thing that might collapse if we stopped attending to it. Yet consider this quietly. If God is infinite, if life is divine, if consciousness is sustained by spirit, what is it that we are trying to uphold? What is it that we fear will fail if we cease repeating words? This very urgency reveals the underlying belief that something is missing now, that truth is not yet established, that God is somehow absent until called forth by human effort. Affirmations, as they are commonly used, arise from this assumption. The seeker stands before life and says, I must declare abundance because lack appears. I must declare health because disease is visible. I must declare peace because fear is present. And while the words themselves may be beautiful, even true in essence, the consciousness from which they are spoken often betrays a hidden fear, the fear that without this repetition, life will not support us, the fear that God must be reminded of his duty. Jesus revealed no such anxiety. Never once do we find him attempting to override appearances with words. When confronted with disease, he did not say, I affirm health. When faced with lack, he did not declare abundance into existence. When storms arose, he did not persuade the universe to calm itself. He rested, he stood, he knew, and from that knowing, harmony appeared. This is why he could say, take no thought for your life. And again, which of you by taking thought can add 1 cubit unto his stature? Thought, in this sense, includes all anxious effort to manage outcomes, even spiritual effort. Jesus was pointing to a higher way, a way that begins where effort ends. Joel Goldsmith saw clearly that much of modern spirituality had unknowingly replaced trust with technique. He observed that the human mind, once it enters the spiritual path, often carries its old habits with it. Where once it worried about money, it now worries about manifesting abundance. Where once it feared sickness, it now fears failing to affirm correctly. Where once it sought control through planning, it now seeks control through spiritual language. The form changes, but the underlying consciousness remains the same. And so we must ask ourselves, not critically, but honestly, from where am I speaking when I repeat these words? Am I resting in the assurance of God's presence, or am I trying to make something happen? Am I acknowledging what is, or am I attempting to change what appears? Am I living from truth, or am I using truth? Jesus said, "The kingdom of God is not meat and drink, but righteousness and peace and joy in the Holy Ghost." The kingdom is not built through effort. It is entered through recognition. It does not respond to pressure. It reveals itself in surrender. And this is why all effort-based spirituality eventually leads to fatigue. The seeker becomes tired, discouraged, even disillusioned, wondering why so much speaking has produced so little peace. The tragedy is not that affirmations fail, but that they distract from something infinitely simpler. They keep the attention outward toward words, toward results, toward time. They encourage the seeker to remain in the posture of one who is becoming rather than one who already is. And as long as one is becoming, one is not resting. As long as one is striving, one is not receiving. "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest," Jesus said. He did not say, "Come and labor more efficiently." He did not say, "Come and speak more convincingly." He offered rest. And rest, in spiritual terms, is not inactivity. It is the cessation of the false sense of responsibility for life itself. Let us understand this clearly. The moment you feel that your well-being depends upon how well you repeat words, how consistently you affirm, how strongly you believe, you have unknowingly placed yourself back at the center of the universe. And Jesus removed himself from that center entirely when he said, "The Father within me doeth the works." This was not humility as a moral virtue. It was a statement of fact. He had seen that the personal self was never the doer. So the modern obsession with affirmation is not a moral error. It is a misunderstanding of identity. It is the belief that the human mind must act in order for God to function. And until this belief is seen and gently released, the seeker remains busy but not free, devoted but not at peace, sincere but still burdened. We are not here to perfect a method. We are here to awaken from the belief that method is necessary. And this awakening begins the moment we dare to question not the words we speak, but the consciousness from which we speak them. My friends, if we would truly understand why Jesus never used affirmations, we must be willing to see from where he lived, from where he spoke, and from where he acted. For every word that comes from the mouth reveals the consciousness behind it. Words spoken from fear carry fear. Words spoken from effort carry strain. But words spoken from realization carry authority without force, peace without explanation, power without assertion. Jesus did not live as a man attempting to reach God. He lived as consciousness resting in God. This is the standpoint from which all of his words flowed. And unless we glimpse this standpoint, we will continue to misunderstand not only his teachings, but his entire life. We will try to imitate his words while missing the consciousness that made those words unnecessary. Consider again his simple, radical declaration, "I of mine own self do nothing." These are not the words of a teacher diminishing himself for humility's sake. These are the words of one who has seen through the illusion of a personal doer. He is not saying, "I choose not to act." He is saying, "There is no personal self here to act." And then he adds, "The Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works." Here, Jesus places the entire responsibility of life where it belongs in God. Now ask yourself quietly, if Jesus knew that the Father within was doing the works, what need would there be for affirmations? What need would there be to repeat statements of truth, to convince life to respond? Would you remind the sun to shine? Would you affirm that your heart must beat? Would you declare that life should sustain itself? No, these things occur because they are governed by law, not by human insistence. Jesus lived in the recognition that divine law was already functioning. He did not attempt to activate it. He did not try to direct it. He did not seek to influence it with words. He trusted it not as belief, but as fact. And this trust was so complete that fear had no place to attach itself. When he said, "Before Abraham was, I am," he was not making a philosophical statement. He was revealing identity. He was speaking from that eternal awareness, which knows no beginning and no end. This "I am" was not something he declared to become powerful. It was what he knew himself to be. And because he knew it, he did not need to speak it repeatedly. We must see this clearly. Jesus did not use words to change reality. He used words to reveal reality. His words were never a means to an end. They were expressions of what was already seen. This is why they carried authority. Not the authority of personality, but the authority of truth recognized. Joel Goldsmith often reminded us that Jesus was not demonstrating personal power. He was demonstrating the powerlessness of the personal sense. He was showing that when the belief in separation dissolves, what remains is the effortless activity of God. Healing, supply, harmony, these were not goals Jesus pursued. They were the natural effects of consciousness aligned with its source. When Jesus stood before disease, he did not see something to be overcome. He saw something unreal, something without law, something without divine authority. And because he did not accept it as real, it could not remain. Not because he denied it with words, but because he saw through it with awareness. He said, "Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment." Righteous judgment is not positive thinking. It is not replacing one thought with another. It is spiritual discernment, the ability to see what is of God and what is not, and to rest in that seeing without struggle. Jesus' entire ministry flowed from this one recognition. God is present. God is active. God is sufficient. Therefore, nothing needs to be added, corrected, improved, or persuaded. This is why he could withdraw into silence so often. This is why prayer for him was not asking, but communion. This is why he could say, "Your Father knoweth what things ye have need of before ye ask him." What kind of consciousness would say such a thing? Only one that is free from anxiety. Only one that has relinquished the belief that life depends upon human effort. Only one that has discovered the kingdom within and found it complete. My friends, until we see that Jesus lived from a different standpoint altogether, we will continue to borrow his language while missing his life. We will say, "I am" as a declaration while he lived, "I am" as identity, we will speak truth to fix conditions, while he rested in truth and allowed conditions to dissolve. This is not something to imitate outwardly. It is something to awaken to inwardly. The standpoint Jesus lived from is not reserved for him alone. It is the natural state of consciousness when the belief in separation has fallen away. And it is this standpoint, not words, not affirmations, not effort, that we are being gently led back to. My beloved friends, now we come to a point that must be seen very clearly, yet very gently, for here lies one of the most subtle crossroads on the spiritual path. Many sincere seekers linger here for years, not because they lack devotion, but because they have not yet discerned the difference between affirmation and recognition. The words may sound similar, the intention may feel noble, but the consciousness behind them is entirely different. Affirmation, as it is commonly practiced, begins with a sense of absence. Something appears lacking, broken, fearful, or incomplete, and the human mind responds by speaking words of truth in an attempt to change that appearance. There is effort in it. There is direction in it. There is a future orientation in it. Even when the words are correct, the standpoint is still that of one who is trying to arrive somewhere else. Recognition begins from an entirely different place. Recognition does not speak toward truth. It rests in truth. It does not attempt to change what appears. It sees through the appearance to what is eternally real. Recognition is not something you do. It is something that dawns when effort ceases. It is not an activity of the mind, but a yielding of the mind to awareness. Jesus never affirmed God into existence. He never declared unity in order to achieve it. He never spoke health to make it real. He recognized God as the only presence, health as the only law, life as eternally whole. And because this recognition was complete, there was no need to reinforce it with repetition. Consider this quietly. If you must repeat a statement in order to believe it, then belief is still operating. And belief, no matter how positive, is not knowing. Jesus did not believe in God. He knew God. He did not hope that divine law would function. He rested in the certainty that it already was functioning. This is why his words were few, simple, and often followed by silence. Joel Goldsmith spoke often of this distinction, though always in his gentle way. He reminded us that truth does not become more true by repetition. 2 + 2 is 4, whether spoken once or 1,000 times. The law does not respond to insistence. It operates by its own nature. And so, when we find ourselves repeating affirmations in order to feel secure, we may pause and ask, what am I still doubting? Recognition does not attempt to overcome doubt. It bypasses it. It does not argue with fear. It sees fear as unreal. It does not try to improve the human condition. It recognizes that the human condition was never the truth of being. This is why recognition carries such quiet power. It does not meet error on its own level. When Jesus said, "It is finished," he was not announcing the end of a struggle. He was revealing the completeness that had always been present. He was not affirming victory. He was resting in the eternal fact of God's allness. And in that resting, the illusion of separation had no place to remain. Affirmation keeps the seeker engaged with appearances. Recognition frees the seeker from them. Affirmation often says, "This is not yet, but it will be." Recognition says, "This already is." And there is an immeasurable difference between the two. One postpones peace. The other reveals peace now. My friends, this does not mean that words of truth are wrong. It means they are secondary. They are effects, not causes. When recognition dawns, words may arise naturally, but they are no longer tools. They are expressions. They do not strain. They do not seek results. They simply bear witness to what has been seen. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free, Jesus said. He did not say, ye shall repeat the truth. He did not say, ye shall declare the truth until it works. He said, know. And knowing, in the spiritual sense, is not mental agreement. It is the still awareness that no longer asks, no longer seeks, no longer tries to improve what God has already completed. When recognition replaces affirmation, something very subtle yet profound happens. The sense of a personal self managing life begins to loosen. The burden of responsibility shifts. The seeker no longer feels that peace depends upon correct words or consistent practice. Peace becomes the ground rather than the goal. This is why Jesus could sleep in a storm. This is why he could face hatred without defense. This is why he could stand before death without fear, not because he affirmed courage, but because he recognized life. Not because he declared safety, but because he knew there was nothing outside God to threaten him. And so, as we move forward, let us not ask whether we should or should not use affirmations. That question belongs to the human mind. Let us ask instead, from where am I living? From where am I speaking? Am I trying to make truth function, or am I allowing myself to rest in the truth that is already functioning as my very being? My friends, we now approach a point that must be handled with great tenderness, for here the ego often hides itself behind sacred language. There is no deception more subtle than spiritual language spoken from an unexamined sense of personal identity, and nowhere is this more evident than in the modern use of the words I am. I am is the most sacred utterance in all of Scripture. It is not a phrase, it is not a formula, it is not a declaration meant to produce results. It is the name of being itself. When God spoke from the burning bush and said, I am that I am, he was not offering Moses a sentence to repeat. He was revealing the nature of reality, self-existent, eternal, needing nothing outside itself to sustain it. This I am was not given to be used. It was revealed to be known. Yet the human mind, once it encounters this truth, often does what it has always done. It takes what is revealed inwardly and turns it outward into a tool. And so we hear, I am healthy, I am abundant, I am successful, I am loved. The words may be true in essence, but we must look beyond the words and see from where they are spoken. Are they arising from realization, or are they being used to cover fear? Very often, the repetition of I am, followed by a description, is an attempt to improve the human sense of self. It is the personal I reaching upward and attaching divine language to itself. And this, my friends, is precisely what Jesus never did. Jesus did not say, I am powerful, I am protected, I am successful. He said simply, I am, and then he stopped. He did not qualify it. He did not decorate it. He did not turn it into a personal statement. Why? Because the moment you say, I am this, or I am that, you have subtly returned to the realm of human identity. You have defined yourself again. You have limited the infinite to a concept. The true I am cannot be described, for any description is a boundary. The moment the I am is used to secure health, wealth, or safety, it has been reduced from being to function, from identity to instrument. Joel Goldsmith warned of this again and again, though always gently. He reminded us that the ego is quite willing to give up material language if it can retain control through spiritual language. The false self does not mind saying God or Christ or I am, so long as it remains the one speaking, directing, and managing outcomes. And so the seeker may feel very spiritual while still living from the same center of personal will. This is why repetition often brings only temporary comfort. It soothes the mind for a moment, but it does not dissolve the underlying sense of separation. The personal self is still there, still trying, still hoping, still guarding against fear. And because the false self has not been seen through, it quietly remains in power, now clothed in sacred words. Jesus never attempted to strengthen a personal identity. He came to dissolve it. He that loseth his life for my sake shall find it, he said. He was not speaking of physical death. He was speaking of the surrender of the personal sense of I that believes it must protect, improve, and sustain itself. Only when that false sense is relinquished does the true I am reveal itself as life itself. When Jesus said, I and my Father are one, he was not making a personal claim. He was revealing the absence of a separate self altogether. There was no personal I left to affirm anything. There was only the I am expressing itself without obstruction. And this is why his words carried such authority. They were not spoken to create truth. They were spoken from truth already realized. My friends, this does not mean that the words I am are wrong. It means they are too holy to be used casually. They are not meant to decorate the human self. They are meant to reveal that the human self was never the truth of being. The I am does not belong to you as a person. You belong to the I am as its expression. The moment you feel the need to repeat I am in order to feel safe, you may pause gently and ask, who is seeking safety? The I am does not seek. The I am does not repeat. The I am simply is. And when this is seen, even faintly, there is a quiet release. The strain eases. The effort softens. The need to declare dissolves into the peace of recognition. Be still and know that I am God. Not speak, not declare, not repeat. Be still. And in that stillness, the false I loosens its grip, and the true I am reveals itself not as a phrase on the lips, but as the very life by which you live. My beloved friends, having seen how easily sacred words can be taken up by the human mind and turned into instruments of effort, we are now ready to look at what Jesus actually relied upon. Not what he spoke about, not what others later said about him, but the method, if we may even use that word, that governed his life. And you will discover that it was not a method at all, but a state of being so quiet, so inward, so surrendered, that it left no room for personal striving. Jesus lived from silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of fullness. Not the silence of waiting, but the silence of knowing. Again and again in the record, we find him withdrawing from the crowd, retreating from activity, going alone into the mountain, entering into solitude. Why? Was it to rest the body? Perhaps. But far more deeply, it was because he knew that truth is not heard in noise, and God is not realized in effort. He did not go into silence to ask God what to do. He did not enter prayer to persuade God to act. He entered silence because he already knew where the source was. He was not reaching upward. He was resting inward. This is why his prayer was never anxious, never urgent, never pleading. It was communion. It was awareness turning back upon itself. Jesus said, the words that I speak unto you, I speak not of myself, but the Father that dwelleth in me. He doeth the works. This single statement reveals everything. He did not rely on words to produce power. He allowed power to express itself, and words followed naturally, effortlessly, without strain. The silence came first. The recognition came first. The action flowed afterward. This is the great reversal that the human mind struggles to accept. The world teaches us to act first and hope for peace later. Jesus revealed peace first, and action unfolded rightly from it. He did not treat silence as a technique to get results. Silence was his natural dwelling place. It was the atmosphere in which he lived and moved and had his being. Joel Goldsmith understood this deeply. He taught that the most important moment on the spiritual path is the moment when one stops trying to hear God and simply becomes quiet enough to notice that God is already present. This is why he said that prayer is not talking to God, but listening, not listening for words, but listening in the sense of receptive awareness. The human mind fears silence because silence removes its function. In silence, there is no planning, no affirming, no controlling. And so the mind asks, what if nothing happens? But Jesus lived to show us that everything happens when personal effort ceases. Take no thought, he said, not because thought is evil, but because thought cannot do what awareness already is. When Jesus faced the tomb of Lazarus, he did not affirm life repeatedly. He did not declare victory over death. He lifted his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me, and I knew that thou hearest me always. This is not a prayer of request. This is recognition. He was acknowledging what already was. And then, without strain, without effort, life revealed itself. Silence, my friends, is not empty. It is pregnant with truth. It is the womb in which realization unfolds. When you enter silence not to achieve something, but to rest as awareness itself, you are standing on the same ground from which Jesus lived. And in that ground, fear cannot root itself, lack cannot sustain itself, discord cannot claim authority. This is why Jesus could say, Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth. The world gives peace after conditions change. The Christ reveals peace before conditions are even addressed. And once peace is established inwardly, the outer picture rearranges itself without struggle. The silent method Jesus used is not something to copy outwardly. It is not about retreating to mountains or closing your eyes for a certain number of minutes. It is about relinquishing the belief that you are the one who must make life work. It is the surrender of personal responsibility for divine activity. It is the quiet recognition the Father within is doing the works. When this is seen, even dimly, the compulsion to affirm begins to fade. Words fall away naturally. Effort softens. The seeker no longer feels the need to convince life of anything, and in that relinquishment, something deeper than words begins to operate. Be still and know that I am God. Not act, not declare, not repeat, but be still. This stillness is not passivity. It is alignment. It is the consciousness that has returned to its source. And from this source, life flows freely, intelligently, harmoniously, without strain. My friends, now we arrive at a place where much confusion has entered the spiritual path, even among those of sincere devotion. It is the misunderstanding of prayer itself. For when prayer is misunderstood, all spiritual practice becomes strained, effortful, and subtly fearful. And when prayer is understood, effort falls away and life is revealed as already held in divine order. Prayer, as Joel Goldsmith taught it, was never asking God for anything. It was never declaring truth to make it happen. It was never informing God of a condition, nor reminding God of a need. Prayer, in its true sense, is the conscious recognition of God's presence where you are. It is the inward turning of awareness from appearance to reality. It is communion, not conversation. Jesus made this clear when he said, "Your Father knoweth what things ye have need of before ye ask him." If this is true, and Jesus spoke only from what he knew, then what purpose could asking possibly serve? What function would declaration fulfill? Asking implies absence. Declaring implies uncertainty. Recognition alone implies truth. The human sense of prayer is rooted in separation. It assumes God is somewhere else, listening from a distance, perhaps willing, perhaps reluctant, perhaps waiting to be convinced by sincerity or persistence. But Jesus never prayed to a distant God. He communed with the Father within, and Goldsmith devoted his life to restoring this understanding to modern seekers. When Jesus prayed, he did not say, "Father, make thyself present." He said, "Father, I thank thee." Gratitude is not persuasion. Gratitude is recognition. It is the acknowledgement of what already is. And this is why gratitude is so powerful. It does not ask for fulfillment. It rests in fulfillment. Joel Goldsmith often said that the moment you recognize the presence of God, prayer is complete. Nothing more is needed. There is no power outside you to move. There is no condition to overcome. There is no truth to convince into operation. Divine law is already functioning, and prayer simply aligns consciousness with that fact. This is why Goldsmith warned against prayer that seeks to change conditions. The moment prayer becomes an attempt to alter appearances, it has left the realm of spirit and entered the realm of human will. And human will, no matter how well-intentioned, cannot produce spiritual results. It can only rearrange appearances temporarily. Jesus said, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." Notice the order. First the kingdom, first the recognition of God's presence, and only then do things appear as effects. When this order is reversed, prayer becomes struggle. When it is honored, prayer becomes rest. My friends, declaring truth in order to get something is still a form of asking. It may sound more confident, more spiritual, but the consciousness behind it is the same. It says, "This is not yet real, and I must make it so." True prayer never says this. True prayer says, "It is." Jesus never prayed for health. He never prayed for supply. He never prayed for protection. He lived from the awareness that life itself was God. And from that awareness, health, supply, and protection were natural expressions. They did not require verbal reinforcement. They flowed as law. Goldsmith taught that prayer is not something you do at a certain hour of the day. It is a state of being. It is the continuous awareness of God as the only presence, power, and activity. When this awareness is present, even silently, even wordlessly, prayer is occurring. This is why silence is so essential. In silence, there is no asking. There is no declaring. There is no mental outlining of what should happen next. There is only the quiet awareness of being. And in that awareness, the full sense of separation dissolves. Be still and know that I am God. Not ask, not declare, not repeat. Know. Knowing does not strain. Knowing does not hope. Knowing does not wait. Knowing rests. And when prayer is understood in this way, something remarkable happens. The burden lifts. The seeker no longer feels responsible for outcomes. Life is no longer a problem to be solved. It becomes a revelation unfolding moment by moment. Fear diminishes, not because it is fought, but because it is no longer believed. This is the prayer Jesus lived. This is the prayer Goldsmith taught. And this is the prayer that ends the endless cycle of effort and disappointment. For in true prayer, nothing is added to you. Something is removed, the belief that you were ever separate from God. My friends, as we move deeper into this unfolding, we must now face a belief so widely accepted that it is rarely questioned, the belief that spirituality is meant to produce results. This belief appears harmless, even reasonable, and yet it quietly binds the seeker to the very struggle he longs to escape. For the moment spiritual life is measured by outcomes, it is no longer rooted in truth, but in time. Results belong to the realm of appearances. They rise and fall. They come and go. They are subject to delay, change, and reversal. And when the seeker ties peace, faith, or spiritual success to results, peace is always postponed. Faith becomes conditional, and spirituality becomes another form of waiting. Jesus never lived this way. He did not say, "I will be at peace when the condition improves." He did not say, "I will trust God if the outcome is favorable." He rested in truth first. And because truth was established inwardly, results followed naturally, without strain and without anticipation. The danger of results-oriented spirituality is subtle. It convinces the seeker that realization lies just ahead, after the healing, after the supply appears, after the relationship improves. And so consciousness is always leaning forward, always watching the outer picture, always evaluating whether truth is working. This posture alone guarantees unrest. Joel Goldsmith spoke clearly on this point. He reminded us that when we seek results, we are still living from the belief that appearances have power. We are still granting authority to what is seen, measured, and reported by the senses. And the Christ consciousness does not live there. It abides beyond appearances in the unchanging presence of God. Jesus said, "My peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth." The world gives peace after results. The Christ reveals peace before results. And only the latter has the power to endure. Peace that depends upon conditions is no peace at all. It is merely relief, and relief must constantly be renewed. Consider this quietly. If you practice prayer or affirmation in order to get something, what happens when that something does not appear quickly? Discouragement enters. Doubt arises. Effort increases. And the seeker begins to question not the method, but himself. Perhaps I did not believe enough. Perhaps I did not affirm correctly. Perhaps I am not worthy. Thus, spirituality, meant to liberate, becomes a source of self-judgment. Jesus never invited this burden. He said, "Take my yoke upon you, for my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." The burden becomes heavy only when the seeker assumes responsibility for producing results. When that responsibility is surrendered, the yoke dissolves and life flows. Results are effects. They cannot be chased without strengthening the illusion that they are causes. When consciousness rests in God as the only cause, effects appear in their proper time and form. But when effects are pursued directly, the seeker remains entangled in appearances, even while speaking spiritual language. This is why Jesus instructed, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God," not the healing, not the provision, not the sign, the kingdom. And the kingdom is not a result, it is a realization. It is the recognition of God's presence, as the ground of being. When this is seen, even faintly, the obsession with outcomes loosens its grip. My friends, the spiritual path does not lead from problem to solution. It leads from illusion to truth. And when truth is seen, problems dissolve, not because they were fixed, but because they were never real in the way they appeared. The moment we stop asking, "Is this working?" and begin resting in God is, the entire struggle shifts. Results come and go. Truth remains, and only that which remains can be trusted. My beloved friends, having seen how easily the seeker becomes entangled in words, results, and effort, we now come to a turning point that marks the maturing of spiritual consciousness. It is the quiet shift from speaking truth to being truth. This shift does not announce itself. It does not arrive with emotion or demonstration. It comes silently, as a deep inner settling, when the soul grows weary of striving and finally rests. At first, the seeker speaks truth, because truth feels distant. Words are used as bridges to something believed to be elsewhere. But as understanding deepens, something begins to change. The need to speak diminishes. The urgency fades. The compulsion to repeat softens. And in this gentle quiet, truth begins to live itself. Jesus never tried to embody truth. He did not practice being the Christ. He was. And because he was, there was no effort to maintain it. Being requires no maintenance. Being does not need reinforcement. Being does not fear loss. Only that which is constructed must be protected. When the seeker moves from speaking to being, the center of gravity shifts inward. Life is no longer managed through mental activity. It is lived through awareness. Decisions are no longer forced. They arise. Actions are no longer defended. They unfold. The need to announce spiritual understanding disappears because understanding has become self-evident. Joel Goldsmith often said that the truth you must declare has not yet been realized. When truth is realized, it speaks for itself or remains silent. And this silence is not emptiness. It is fullness without strain. It is the peace Jesus referred to when he said, "The kingdom of God cometh not with observation." Being truth does not mean withdrawing from life. It means living without the constant inner commentary that seeks to justify, protect, or improve the self. The false self thrives on narration. The Christ lives without explanation. This is why Jesus so often refused to answer accusations, refused to defend himself, refused to explain his authority. Explanation belongs to the human mind. Truth needs none. As this shift occurs, the seeker may notice something unexpected. The outer life does not immediately become dramatic or extraordinary. In fact, it may appear quite ordinary. And yet beneath this ordinariness flows a steadiness that was never there before, a quiet confidence, not in outcomes, but in being, a sense that life is carrying itself. The scriptures tell us, "Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus." This is not a command to think differently. It is an invitation to relinquish the belief that thinking is the source of life. The mind of Christ is awareness itself, unburdened, unafraid, unattached. It does not assert truth. It abides in it. When truth is being rather than spoken, fear loses its audience. Doubt loses its fuel. Conditions may still appear, but they no longer define identity. The seeker no longer says, "I am afraid," but quietly recognizes fear is appearing. There is distance now, not the distance of denial, but the distance of clarity. This is why Jesus could say, In the world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. He did not overcome the world by fighting it. He overcame it by not living in it psychologically. He lived in God. And from that standpoint, the world had no authority. My friends, this shift from speaking to being is not achieved by discipline. It happens when the mind becomes convinced, not intellectually, but inwardly, that it cannot carry the weight of life. When effort collapses, grace enters. When control is relinquished, guidance appears. When words fall silent, truth stands revealed. And so, if you find yourself speaking less, explaining less, striving less, do not fear that you are losing something. You are not becoming passive. You are becoming aligned. You are not giving up truth. You are allowing truth to live as you. My friends, when we come to this point on the path, a subtle fear often arises in the heart of the seeker. It is not always spoken, but it is deeply felt. The fear is this: if I stop affirming, what will hold my life together? If I stop declaring truth, what will protect me? What will sustain me? What will ensure that good continues to appear? This fear reveals how deeply we have believed that life depends upon our mental activity. And yet, the very moment affirmations are dropped, not forced away, not resisted, but gently outgrown, something extraordinary is discovered. Life continues, breath continues, intelligence continues, order continues, and peace, long obscured by effort, quietly comes to the surface. Jesus never feared letting go of words, because he never believed words were holding anything together. He knew that in him we live and move and have our being. He trusted being itself. And when the seeker begins, even faintly, to trust being rather than speech, the need to affirm dissolves naturally. At first, there may be a sense of vulnerability. The mind feels exposed, as though it has lost a shield. For affirmations often function as emotional armor. They are used to push fear away, to cover uncertainty, to reassure the personal self. When they fall away, fear may briefly appear more clearly, not because it has grown stronger, but because it is no longer being managed. This is not a setback. It is a revelation. Joel Goldsmith taught that whatever remains when effort stops is what you actually believe. And so, when affirmations are dropped, what remains is seen plainly. If fear arises, it is not an enemy. It is an opportunity to see that fear was never dissolved by words, only postponed by them. Recognition dissolves what repetition never could. When affirmations fall away, silence takes their place, and in that silence, the seeker begins to notice something unexpected. There is an intelligence at work that does not require instruction. There is a guidance that does not shout. There is a peace that does not rise and fall with circumstances. This peace was always present, but it was hidden beneath the noise of doing. Jesus said, "Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin." He was not offering poetry, he was revealing law. Life does not labor to sustain itself. Only the personal sense labors. And when that labor ceases, life reveals its effortless nature. Dropping affirmations does not mean dropping truth. It means releasing the belief that truth must be used. Truth is not a tool, it is a state of being. And when you stop using it, you begin to live it. You discover that God has been functioning perfectly without your assistance. My friends, this is where trust is born, not the trust of belief, but the trust of experience. You see for yourself that silence does not produce chaos. Stillness does not result in lack. Rest does not invite danger. On the contrary, life begins to unfold with greater harmony because it is no longer being interfered with. Jesus never said, "Without affirmations, ye can do nothing." He said, "Without me, ye can do nothing." And the me he spoke of was not words, not declarations, not effort. It was the living presence of God within. When this presence is acknowledged, not verbally, but inwardly, it becomes evident that it has always been the doer. So when affirmations are dropped, something very simple happens. The seeker stops standing between God and life. The personal sense steps aside. And in that stepping aside, divine order reveals itself. This is not loss, it is liberation. My beloved friends, when affirmations have fallen away and the burden of mental effort has been laid down, a new way of living quietly reveals itself. It is not new in truth, but new in experience. It is the life lived from the inner source, rather than managed from the surface. And this, more than anything else, marks the transition from human striving to spiritual living. Most of humanity lives as though life were a problem to be solved. Each day is approached with planning, guarding, anticipating, correcting, and defending. Even in spiritual practice, the mind often asks, "What must I do today to keep things from going wrong?" And so life becomes a continuous effort to stay ahead of danger, lack, or disorder. Yet Jesus lived in an entirely different relationship to life. He did not manage life, he trusted life. He said, "Therefore take no thought, saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or wherewithal shall we be clothed?" These words are not irresponsible. They are revelatory. They reveal that there is an intelligence governing life that does not require human supervision. Jesus was not careless. He was conscious of the only real cause. To live from the inner source is to recognize that the presence of God is not an occasional visitor to your life, but its very foundation. It is not something you consult when problems arise. It is the very life by which problems are dissolved before they gain authority. When you live from this source, you do not react to appearances. You rest beneath them. Joel Goldsmith often said that the human mind wants to do something about every situation, while the Christ consciousness knows that being is the action. The human mind rushes ahead, attempting to predict outcomes and prevent difficulties. The Christ remains still, allowing right unfoldment to reveal itself. And this stillness is not passivity, it is alignment with divine law. When Jesus faced opposition, he did not strategize. When he encountered lack, he did not worry. When he was misunderstood, he did not defend. He lived from a center so deep that surface conditions could not disturb it. "None of these things move me," said Paul, speaking from the same realization. This is the life lived from within. Managing life assumes separation. It assumes that life is happening to you, and that you must respond quickly enough to protect yourself. Living from the inner source reveals that life is happening as you, and that the intelligence governing it is already present. In this awareness, urgency dissolves, fear softens, decisions arise naturally without strain. This does not mean that action ceases. It means that action is no longer driven by anxiety. When action arises from the inner source, it carries no burden. It is simple, appropriate, and often surprisingly effortless. Jesus did not plan miracles. He responded to the moment, guided by awareness rather than anticipation. "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding," Scripture tells us. Leaning on our own understanding is precisely what managing life is. Trusting in the Lord is the relinquishment of that management. And when this trust becomes lived experience rather than belief, life begins to reveal a harmony that cannot be produced by planning. My friends, living from the inner source does not make life smaller. It makes it freer. You may still work, still choose, still engage with the world, but you do so without the sense that everything depends upon you. You become an instrument rather than an operator. You allow life to express itself through you rather than trying to direct it from above. This is the life Jesus lived. This is the life Joel Goldsmith pointed us toward. And it is not a future attainment. It is a present availability, waiting only for the release of the belief that you must manage what God is already sustaining. My friends, when life is no longer managed from the surface and consciousness has begun to rest in its source, we come naturally to the end of technique, not because techniques were wrong, but because they are no longer needed. They fall away as crutches fall away when strength is restored not by effort but by growth, and in their place, something far more profound reveals itself: grace. Grace is perhaps the most misunderstood word in all of spiritual language. It has been treated as a reward, a favor granted from above, a gift bestowed upon those who have done enough, believed enough, or proven themselves worthy. But Jesus revealed grace as something altogether different. Grace is not given. It is the natural action of God when nothing stands in the way. When techniques fall away, what is really falling away is the belief that you are the doer. Technique is always rooted in the assumption that something must be done by you in order for God to act. Grace reveals that God has always been acting, and that the only obstacle was the personal sense standing in the way. Jesus never practiced grace. He lived in it. He did not attempt to receive it. He allowed it to flow, unobstructed. My Father worketh hitherto, and I work, he said, not as two actions, but as one. There was no gap between divine activity and human experience, because the belief in separation had dissolved. Joel Goldsmith taught that grace appears the moment effort ends, not when effort is abandoned out of exhaustion, but when it is released through understanding. When the mind sees clearly that it was never the source of life, it stops trying to be. And in that stopping, grace takes over, not dramatically, not emotionally, but quietly, steadily, inevitably. This is why Jesus said, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." A yoke is only heavy when you believe you are pulling alone. When you discover that you were never the power, the strain dissolves. The burden was never life. It was the belief that life depended upon you. Grace does not announce itself. It does not come with signs or confirmations. It simply begins to operate where resistance has ended. You may notice that problems resolve without struggle, that decisions become clear without analysis, that supply appears without anxiety, that healing unfolds without fixation, not because you did something right, but because you stopped doing what was unnecessary. The human mind wants to hold on to technique because technique provides a sense of control. Grace removes control. It asks for trust, not blind belief, but the trust that comes from recognition, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, saith the Lord. This is not poetry. It is law. Grace does not improve the personal self. It reveals that the personal self was never the center. This is why grace often feels humbling. It removes credit. It removes pride. It removes blame. It leaves only gratitude, not gratitude for what happened, but gratitude for what was always true. When technique ends, comparison ends. The seeker no longer measures progress. There is no longer a sense of being ahead or behind. There is simply presence. And in presence, grace is always active. Jesus never said, "By my technique ye shall be saved." He said, "By grace are ye saved." Saved from what? From the belief in separation, from the illusion of personal doership, from the endless cycle of effort and disappointment. Grace is not something added to life. It is life unobstructed. And so, my friends, if you find techniques falling away, do not rush to replace them. Do not fear that you are becoming careless or uncommitted. You are not losing devotion. You are losing obstruction. Grace is not the result of correct practice. It is the result of clear seeing. When grace takes its place, life becomes simpler, not easier in the human sense, but lighter, more natural, more fluid. You begin to discover that what you once tried to achieve is now simply happening. And this happening is not yours. It is God's own activity expressing itself as your life. My beloved friends, having come to the end of effort and the dawning of grace, we are now prepared to return to the heart of the teaching, the pure I am, untouched by description, unburdened by purpose, unconfined by human meaning. This is the point toward which everything has been leading, though it was never a destination. It is a recognition of what has always been present. The difficulty has never been that we did not know the words I am. The difficulty has been that we have added something to them. We have said, I am this, or I am that, and in doing so, we have clothed the infinite in form. We have taken the name of God and turned it into a statement about the human self, and yet the pure I am precedes every description. It stands before health and sickness, before abundance and lack, before success and failure. It simply is. When Jesus said, "Before Abraham was, I am," he was not placing himself in history. He was stepping outside of history altogether. He was revealing an identity that does not begin with birth and does not end with death. This I am is not improved by circumstances, nor diminished by them. It does not need to be protected, nor enhanced, nor secured. It is the ground of being itself. Joel Goldsmith taught that the moment you add a quality to I am, you have stepped out of the infinite and into the finite, not because the quality is wrong, but because the act of qualifying divides. The pure I am cannot be divided. It cannot be measured. It cannot be compared. It cannot be improved. It is already complete. This is why Jesus so often refused titles. When called good, he replied, "Why callest thou me good? There is none good but one, that is, God." He was not rejecting goodness. He was refusing to personalize it. He would not allow the human sense to claim what belonged only to God. He knew that the moment goodness was claimed personally, it was no longer infinite. Returning to the pure I am is not an act of concentration. It is an act of release. You are not trying to hold on to awareness. You are letting go of everything that is not awareness. You are not affirming identity. You are allowing false identity to fall away. And what remains is astonishingly simple. In this I am, there is no fear, because fear requires a future. There is no regret, because regret requires a past. There is no striving, because striving requires lack. The I am lives only in the eternal now, where God said, "I am the Lord, I change not." This changelessness is not stagnation, it is stability. It is the rock upon which Jesus built his life. My friends, when you rest in the pure I am, without adjectives, without goals, without expectation, you may feel at first as though you are doing nothing. And indeed, you are doing nothing because nothing is required. But in this apparent nothingness, everything real is present. The life that sustains the stars is sustaining you. The intelligence that orders the universe is ordering your affairs. The love that knows no opposite is expressing itself as your being. This is why Jesus could say, "Abide in me, and I in you." Abiding is not effort. It is remaining. It is not seeking. It is staying where you already are. And when you abide in the I am, you discover that it has always been abiding as you. There is no need to return to the I am repeatedly. You have never left it. There is only the need to notice when the mind wanders into description, into identity, into effort, and to gently let those additions fall away. Each time they fall away, the I am stands revealed again, silent, whole, untouched. This is the simplicity that the human mind resists because it offers no role, no achievement, no accomplishment, and yet it is the simplicity that sets us free. For in the I am, there is no one to save, no one to heal, no one to improve. There is only God being God, and that being is your life. My beloved friends, as we come to this gentle close, let us not think of it as an ending, but as a settling. For truth does not conclude. It reveals itself, and then quietly remains. What we have been considering together is not a new doctrine, not a better practice, not a higher form of effort. It is the uncovering of something so simple that the human mind has overlooked it again and again. The mind always looks for complexity. It believes that what is real must be difficult, that what is valuable must be earned, that what is divine must be approached through effort. And so, when the teaching points instead to rest, to stillness, to recognition, the mind resists. It says, "Surely it cannot be this simple." Yet Jesus revealed again and again that it is precisely this simple. "Except ye be converted and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven." The child does not affirm life into existence. The child does not manage reality. The child lives, and in living, trusts. This trust is not naive. It is natural. It is what remains when the burden of personal responsibility is laid down. We have seen that Jesus never used affirmations, not because words are wrong, but because they were unnecessary. He did not live from words. He lived from awareness. He did not speak truth to make it function. He recognized truth and allowed it to reveal itself. And this recognition required no strain, no repetition, no defense. It required only stillness. Joel Goldsmith spent his life pointing to this stillness. He did not ask his students to become spiritual achievers. He invited them to stop believing they were separate. He did not promise dramatic experiences. He promised peace. And peace, my friends, is not exciting to the human mind, but it is unmistakable to the soul. This teaching is simple, but it is not easy for the mind because it removes the mind from the center. It leaves nothing to control, nothing to perfect, nothing to maintain. It reveals that God has always been doing the work, and that our only task, if we may even call it that, is to stop interfering, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. When this becomes more than a verse, when it becomes a lived awareness, life changes quietly but profoundly. Problems lose their weight. Fear loses its authority. Decisions unfold naturally. Guidance appears without pressure. And all of this happens not because you have mastered something, but because you have stopped trying to. My friends, you do not need to remember everything that has been spoken here. Truth does not depend on memory. You do not need to repeat these ideas. Truth does not respond to repetition. You do not need to hold on tightly. Truth is not lost. Simply allow yourself, from time to time, to rest, to sit quietly, to notice awareness itself, to recognize, without words if possible, I am. Not I am this, not I am that, just I am. And in that moment, however brief, the Christ stands revealed, not as a figure in history, but as your own true identity. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He did not say, I will show you the way. He spoke from the I am, that is the way, and that I am has never been absent from you. It has only been covered by effort, by fear, by the belief that something must be done. Let effort fall away. Let silence speak. Let recognition replace repetition. And you will find that what you have been seeking has been living as you all along.